Good skill builder project for anybody looking to get into this from the just past beginner stage all the way to the advanced. Your creativity can determine how far you can take a multi-sided project that you're dealing with. We'll walk through some of the steps on making a simple tenon fitted lid. It is a good project to show off woods that have interesting grain, but because you're dealing with a multi-axis project that's going to be turning off center where the weight is not centrally distributed, and we'll show you how to mount those points, you want to be sure you're picking woods that are fairly solid. We don't want punky woods that are structurally questionable. Because you're going to be spinning off center, you're going to be throwing that weight around the axis. You want to make sure that when you're in between the points, the wood is solid enough to where you won't lose the grip that you have between centers. The last thing we want to see is anybody get hurt with the wood coming out of the lathe. One of the most safe ways you can turn is in between centers on most projects. But again, if you're turning off center, you're applying a lot more forces to the project than you would normally. This is the samples that I brought tonight are what you would call single-sided or straight axis turnings when we're turning off center. And that means that the points when we place them off center are roughly in line with each other. You can also take these and turn it into what they call a twisted box when you actually offset centers this way, and the box will have a twist to it. So the creativity, this is just the beginning, but in addition to boxes, you can also make tool handles. These make great fits for like screwdrivers. You may even want some of your lathe tools done this way. So it's a good project even just for standard spindle turning and be able to take those skills in that direction. You can do them as straight-sided, doesn't mean they have to be parallel. You can also have ones that are tapered. So you can see this has a simple lid of a different wood made as an accent with a little finial on top of it. You also don't have to make a tight joint on the lathe. You can actually make some pommel cuts on your piece, and you get different styles. You can have a fairly low slope lid, or you can really have a fairly steep lid. And those that I've seen some people that have a lot of decorating skills for embellishment, you know, you can see that might also in somebody's piece turn into an owl. You can go down, you can go up. There are different ways to shape your project to make it yours and play with the creativity on them. Some of the things you want to look out for as you're setting up your project that is a little different on a three-sided box than it is a standard cylindrical box is that you need to be careful that you cut your joints flat on the perimeter. You don't want to start tapering them to the inside, because what you'll wind up with is the corners can become lower than they are on the outside edges. So you want to make sure that outside edge stays very flat on a multi-sided box. Once you get in past the center, then you can start tapering it in. But if you have any of this outside perimeter uneven, then it's going to show off the gaps that you get at the joint between the top and the bottom of the lid. And obviously, you can avoid that if you have a pommel cut on it. This box I call my box of errors. The things to avoid box, so to speak. In this particular instance, you see that there's more wood on the two sides than there is this side. You also have the gaps in here that we were showing off, and you can see how far you can get off center if you're not careful. So this was done intentionally to try to show off some of the things you want to avoid, and I'll show you the tips on setup that should help you avoid those mistakes. And I say that primarily because if you see any of those mistakes tonight, remember they're professional. They weren't done by accident as a demonstration purpose. To get into the project and set it up, I've got a little template. If you are unfamiliar with the lathe index, or if you want to, if you don't have indexing on your lathe, I've got this paper template here. You see that on the camera? This one's set up at 120 degrees for the three-sided box, which 3 times 120 is 360 last time I checked my math. Basically, this is a little PDF file that I sent along, so you can access that as the club if you wanted to download one, or you can make your own. If your lathe has indexing, you can set it up for the 120 or whatever number of sides you want to make for your box. All I basically do is come in on one end of this project and line this blank that I've already turned into a cylinder up, roughly signed up here on the bowl, and what I want to do is mark my 3 points. Now I've got my divisions made. Then we'll roll right into putting that in between centers. And we'll use our tool rest to help us out here. Merely going to line my tool rest up. We know it should be straight. I'm going to find each one of those marks, and I'm just going to transfer them down the length of the cylinder. Okay, so I've got those lines made. What we need to do, and the more important part, because we will use these as a visual guide as we're turning, and we're going to try to turn down each side of the box. We're going to have a facet, and we're going to eventually eat away wood here on the face up until it gets to that point, but potentially that point can go away on the side if we go a little too far. What's important is to take that and get those points translated around to the center so that we'll have a reference on the end of the piece. So I'm merely looking at the edge, using my center finder and translating that around. And I'll do this on both ends. What I've got on this end is roughly the circular diameter of the chuck that I'm using tonight. What we want to try to do is determine how far you want to come in. The further you are to the outside diameter of the piece, the flatter the sides are going to be. The closer we get toward the center, we're back to being more of a round edge. So each one of those facets, we want to make approximately the same distance from each end as we come around. And it's not completely magic. You can sit there and do what I did with your eyeball, or you can check with your measuring tape to see where you're at. But roughly, I'm dealing with the same distance off each side that we're looking to create here. So all we've got now is we've got index marks that are going to tell me where I need to place my 2 points. And I'm going to put 1 point here and 1 point directly opposite on the opposite end. Now, don't forget, you're now saying, I'm getting ready to turn this off center, but not quite yet. I'm trying to help you avoid and have success when you go to make one of these pieces. And somebody told me they made this mistake. It wasn't me. But when you're going to set up your box, the points that you wind up with once you've made your 3 sides are going to be your most fragile points on the piece. It's the most likely area you're going to have chip out. So if you want to help build in a little extra insurance, in order to set up the tenon that we're going to make, we're going to go ahead and cut down into the wood approximately the height that we want the tenon, and also the amount of wood we're going to have to remove to separate the 2 pieces. If you have a really nice piece of wood and you don't want to sacrifice the tenon just like any other box, you can just separate the 2 pieces, but then you'll have to make an insert of another piece of wood to go in here to make your raised tenon. That way your grain match can be a lot closer if you want to go that far on making your box. But what we'll do at this stage of the game is go ahead and make the marks on here where I would like to have the lid versus the bottom, and we'll cut down into the wood. And what that's going to do is, as we turn down the 3 sides of the box, it's going to already have those chunks of wood removed at the tips that are going to be the most fragile. And hopefully when we go to separate the box, that means we're less likely to break that little delicate point right there on each side. As with any box, the ratios that you may want to be dealing with are going to vary depending on your particular taste. If you're looking at something that's going to be approximately 4 inches long, where this one is, if you want to try to play around with the 1/3 2/3 or whatever particular artistic taste meet your sensibilities. That's a decision you can make the call on. And what I'll do is I've gone ahead and made some quick little marks on here. Power. Those are always key things, aren't they?
Plug it in for you?
Yeah, that always helps. Safety first.
It's a lot better than me spinning it.
It's like the Aggie chainsaw. What's that noise?
There it is.
There we go. I'll go ahead and put my face shield on. I'll try to remember to flip it up so we won't get too much echo here. And I'll go ahead and transfer these around so you guys can see them a little easier. So approximately, the joint here is at least the tendon you may want to be dealing with, and here's the waist section I'll be planning for. You'll be surprised, even though that appears somewhat deep, how little is going to be left when we switch over and start turning on the multiple sides. Back this off just a hair. I really appreciate the bravery of everybody sitting right here.
What did you use to guide or how much off center you just set that?
Basically, I was approximately measuring it there with the end of the pencil. It's an eyeball. I've done this a number of times. It is not something you have to be super exact with. You can actually set one end radically smaller than the other end to help a little bit with the taper. You just will tend to throw it a little more off center, similar to the way as if we'd have cocked it in there sideways for a three-sided piece. But the main thing that you're looking for when you do this, be sure you get the entire point of your live center and your drive center on the wood. Don't let it hang partially off, unless you're dealing with a little bitty splinter piece of wood that you are not too worried about should it come off. Again, we want to make sure you stay safe, that it's going to sound intimidating when you start. I recommend as you get into this, start with a little smaller piece of wood. That'll help you build up to the larger pieces. And you will find, just like with anything, speed is going to be your friend. A sharp tool is going to help you out. The quality of your cut will vary slightly. I'm going to do most of the work we're dealing with tonight with the spindle roughing gouge. It can do a really good job, especially if you have a nice edge on it. Some woods I found that the skew really helps give you a nicer cut, but standing up in front of a bunch of other wood turners and showing off with a skew is a good way to invite disaster in my experience. So what you want to do is make sure you got it between centers, you got it firm. Obviously, anytime you're dealing with something like this, spin it around. It's even worse than it would be if you were dealing just with a regular spindle, but with this off-center, you can see how big the gap can be away from your tool. So what we're looking to do is make sure you don't flick this on and find out your tool rest was in the way because you had it hanging down here. So always spin it around just like you want to do with all your turnings. Make sure that's tight. Make sure this is up to speed. Now, the other thing that should happen is you want to start out, don't have your speed cranked all the way up. Get out of the line of fire. You want to be able to step to the side. Sorry, y'all can't. But no, we've got our speed completely off. We'll bring it up, and we're going to let it run around. We're going to go through, depending on the size of the lathe and how much off center, what we may look at doing here just for the weight of this particular lathe is bring the points in. See how you can reduce that mass that's flipping around on you because we're out here at this point. Well, my lathe is a pretty good size lathe, but I've got this point that's in here already. We can bring it in and you'll see that it will reduce the amount of flop that happens when we're dealing with the piece.
Do you have to now cut your tenon in deeper?
Well, one of the things that I'm doing is, no, I'm not cutting the tenon until after I've put the 3 sides on the box. This allows me to position, and if I were to go ahead and put the 2 end tenons on the box for being able to mount it in the chuck, what that would do is reduce the amount of wood out here that I would be able to throw it off center. And on smaller pieces, that becomes more important. So what we're going to do is actually turn the 3 sides on the box, and I've cut down in here on the ends. I tend to do pommel cuts, so the chipping is a little less of a hazard. You don't have to, but that's just one of the ways that it'll help you out. And then by coming in and cutting those after the fact, like I said, on these small pieces, I've allowed myself to go almost all the way out to the edge and then come back later and cut those, and you don't have that wood that's been wasted. So spin it around, double check our tightness. Now, when we run one and you turn it on, you're going to expect to see it come up. You can see it stabilize. But naturally, what's going to happen? You're going to have stretched that wood. Y'all can scare me to death with that. Not my stuff. It's always a good idea after you've run it in a little bit to go back and double check your tightness because it's going to loosen up some. So the key to off-center turning is kind of getting used to that feel, the noise, and the little bit of vibration you're going to get. Now at the spindle roughing edge, what you want to do is get your finger up underneath your tool rest, because what's going to happen anytime that we're dealing with cutting this much air in this little wood, the wood is going to come around and have a tendency to impact the tool, and what is it going to do? It's going to push your tool back. The last thing we want to do is allow the tool to come back too far forward because you're sitting here trying to push and release against that. The safety factor that you can help yourself out with is by getting a good clamp on your tool, gripping it between your thumb and forefinger, but also using that forefinger up against your tool rest. Your tool rest is going to be your depth guide. It's going to help you stay in place, and by having that resistance already built in, that tool may come back, but you're going to naturally have that resistance not to go forward past this point, and that's going to help get you a more even cut. You're also going to learn, as you work on your skill sets, we always want to be moving our body. We're not trying to do this. We're always trying to anchor, and we're trying to sway back and forth. So those two things together will help you get a little bit cleaner cut. It's a nice gentle approach. This one's running, I think it was around 15 to 1800. So I've gone up to, depending on the size of the piece, 2,000 range is not unusual for the smaller pieces. You can see the wood here is a little bit softer, and what we'll do is play around with the speed as we get more off of this, and you'll see that the cut will smooth out. As we're able to pick up a little speed, it's going to come across. Here we're already down to about the tenon depth, but you can see this is the line of the cut right here, and we're watching ourselves to see I'm taking a little more off this end than I am this end as we approach this line that's on both sides of this cut. And we want to arrive there at the same point in time. So we want to make sure we're eyeballing to see that our tool rest is lined up correctly with our lathe bed and see if that's going to affect us, because if you have your tool rest that isn't quite parallel to your work, that can throw you off as well. But I think this is just a matter of working around the tray here. So as always, we're getting our anchor, rubbing our bevel, and then we're starting to make our cut. Look at, I don't know if you can make it out on the camera, by going up a little bit on the speed, you see this start to smooth out and get a nicer cut. It's also slowing down and not going across left to right or right to left at quite the same speed. So the approach that you have with the tool, we're beginning to get our lines straight here. Almost there. All right, we're almost to the line on this side. You can see the joint coming around right here. And what we'll do is, the good news about any of these is that you can proceed to the next point in line, and you can always return back to the piece and recut. So if you go past the line, don't panic. You can come back and work on the other three sides and take them all down to the same amount, because even if we cut all this line away on this side, we're always going to have the end points that we want to keep an eye on, and we're going to try to get them to meet on those points that we have. And it doesn't matter if that point is up here at this edge or all the way down here. So you can keep going around until you get them to line up and be the same. So you can see these are really simple cuts. We're not dealing with anything that's overly complicated, because if it was, it probably wouldn't involve me. That's why this is a good project, I think, for once you've gotten your beginning tool control down. It's not that hard to transition into it, and getting the confidence to work with something off-center, even though it's making the noise that it is, and you're working with the same fundamentals that you will with any tool. So we're almost there. Say measure twice, cut once. This is where we want to keep an eye. Right now, it looks like we're about meeting right here, but a little more off this right side. It looks like this face may have to have a little more off of it. Here, I'll jump back to this one face and make another pass on it, just to even up the other two, because again, we're trying to watch for these lines on the ends, and I'm seeing that one just a hair different. So now we got 3 points. Remember, I told you this is the area we're trying to protect. You can see how much was left as we've removed all the side over here. Just for visibility's sake, I'll go ahead and add a little dark lines on these.
Where is your tool rest positioned in reference to the center of the block of wood?
Basically, what I try to do is get my tool so that the tip of the tool is just above center.
Just above the
Right.
center of the block?
Right. It can be just, you can see depending on the height that we're at, but the important thing I find is also the rake of that tool. I'm not trying to come in with it too much of a scraping action. I want to make sure this thing is working for me as a cutting tool. So I get that down at about a 35 to 40 degree angle down on my hip, and that light touch going across helps as much as anything. You have a little more flexibility on that height, but that angle is probably more important. So as we have worked on our 3 sides, we'll jump it back to the center and put it back in between each end. And we'll need to start looking and establishing our tenons. I'll move in. Now, depending on the wood you're working with and how comfortable you are, one of the things that I've found is that to protect the cut, so you don't want to cut in early on the project, and now you wanted to make your separation cut as well as your 2 tenons, a skew comes in real handy, at least for making the plunge cut. And we'll do that on the ends since we've already basically taken off the tips. One of the areas of the biggest concern when you go in and start cutting your tenon on the middle or on either end especially, watch on the extraction of your parting tool. It is easiest, it seems like, to get off center or to let that tip swing in. I hope not to demonstrate that for you, but if you catch one of those corners, it's not the end of the world if you do get a chip out here. Remember, we can always back up and try to work on one of the pommel cut connections here that we'll already know we're going to try on the top and the bottom. It's a little bit deceptive. You always think you're in pretty deep, but you can see right now we don't have enough for the side of the box to come down on the outside of that tenon. So stop and check frequently. Look and see how your depth is working for you. we'll be fine tuning this once we've removed the lid, but I like to make sure we at least get the majority of the material off of the side at this point when it's pretty easy. Right there, that's the one you have to always worry about. Now, since we're between centers, you never want to completely cut all the way through because of the pressure of the tailstock up against the headstock. You're going to most likely bind. That would have been helpful, but fortunately, we're almost there.
Wasn't quick enough.
Yeah. We'll see if it'll hold together for us. We have backup. No need to worry. Fortunately, you have good timing.